Any perfect gifts? Anything? No, you're all a bunch of ungrateful. Just kidding. My God, yeah, okay, that's what I said. That's what I said. That's probably the closest thing. So we're gonna get into the message now. Um, but I've received some pretty awesome gifts. I hope you at some point in your life, maybe you already have, maybe you will, hopefully you will. You'll get some really great things. It's just fun to have things. It's cool to have stuff. And I've had some really thoughtful gifts. Anybody in here you're the thoughtful gift giver? Okay? I love you guys because I get your gift and it makes me feel good. And it's like, oh man, if it's a craft or something, but you look at it and I can be kind of emotional sometimes. So you get dust in the air. That's what it is. But your eyes get a little misty and you're like, you do care. Somebody cares about me. Somebody loves me. And so there's the thoughtful gifts, and then there's the expensive gifts. And you're just like, I don't care if you like me or not. Just buy me something that costs a lot of money. Anybody in here like that? Okay. Great audience participation. I think I'm probably a little bit of both. I like the the thought put into it, but I also have expensive taste. I don't have expensive things, but I do have expensive tastes, and my wife can tell you that. She's like, you're the hardest person to buy gifts for because all you like is the world's most expensive whatever. And I'm like, yeah, well, that's what I like. I know I can't have it, but I still like it. So in all of the gifts that I've ever received, though, I don't think there's any that I would call perfect. And I'll explain because it's all my fault, because I tell people this all the time. I'm not picky, I'm particular. Okay? That's my justification for my problem. But I tell people I'm particular, whether it's clothes or cool stuff, toys, whatever. I don't know if grown-ups are allowed to have toys. But I'll let you into my mind for a minute. When it comes to clothes, dress shirts or like button-up dress shirts or whatever, I like to look nice, but I don't want a ton of clothes. I don't want a ton of dress shirts. So I like them to be nice, but I also like them to be uber practical, right? So if I can get a dress shirt that can be untucked and tucked in, there we go. Why would I buy 2 dress shirts, okay? If I can have it that works with khakis and black pants, right? The buttons, the color of the buttons work with both, or black shoes and brown shoes, and you guys are like, wow, you are insane. But that's kind of one of my biggest pet peeves is when the dress shirt at the bottom separates. Anybody deal with that issue? Okay. Well, that's one of my biggest pet peeves. And so I can be particular with these kinds of things and with gifts. And so I'll get a gift and I'm like, man, that's awesome, but it's not perfect, And I've always imagined what it would be like to get the perfect gift. Anybody like to kind of fantasize about cool things or experiences, or whatever that you could have one day? What the perfect gift would look like how that would make you feel, how that would enable you to do maybe what you'd like to do, or maybe it's practical, it would make you more effective. It would help you do what you need to do. Maybe it would change the way you look, or change the way you do something, or the way you live, or whatever. In a much deeper, eternally significant sense, the author of Hebrews presents Christ as the perfect sacrifice, the perfect gift. The author of Hebrews presents Christ in our text as the perfect sacrifice, the perfect gift. So go with me to Hebrews chapter 9, verses 23 through 28. We're going to finish chapter 9 tonight. It's very exciting. And we're going to start off by reading the verse right before our text, verse 22, so we get a little bit of context for where we're going. Verse 22 says, according to the law, almost everything is purified with blood, and without the shedding of blood, there is no forgiveness. There is no forgiveness. Therefore, verse 23, it was necessary for the copies of the things in the heavens to be purified with these sacrifices. What are these sacrifices? The animal sacrifices, the sacrifices that they would make day after day, and on the Day of Atonement, the blood of those animal sacrifices was used. That's what they're talking about. And so the author tells his audience, hey, it's necessary. This was necessary. And when he tells them that, it's like me telling you it's necessary for you to have your key to start your car. You would say, okay, well, I'm pretty sure I know how this thing works. I know how to operate my automobile. I know how to start my car, okay? In a sense, the audience would have thought the same thing. Okay, I know how this thing works, but the author would continually restate and remind and repeat things throughout Hebrews to get them to transfer the weight of their understanding of the Old Covenant, the weight of that understanding into faith in Jesus. In the Old Covenant, purification of these copies, these earthly things, the elements of the tabernacle itself, the purification of those things was necessary. And the blood of those animal sacrifices would get that job done. They would do the external material purification. That's what they were good for. They served their purpose, but that's it. Those sacrifices did not pave the way for access. They did not make a way for the people to enter into God's presence. And so verse 23 continues. It's necessary for the copies of these things to be purified with those sacrifices, but the heavenly things themselves, the realities, are to be purified with better sacrifices than these. Better sacrifices than these. This may lead us to ask the question, if we're reading pretty quickly, why would the heavenly things have to be purified? Valid question. Why would the true tabernacle, the true sanctuary that we've read about, why would those things have to be purified? One commentator, N.T. Wright, said this: the answer is that there wasn't anything wrong with the heavenly sanctuary itself, but that it needed to be made ready for the arrival of people with whom there had been a very great deal wrong, namely sinful human beings. One pastor said, to the degree that we might defile heaven, Christ in that sense cleanses heaven. So verse 24 goes on to say, for Christ did not enter a sanctuary made with hands, only a model of the true one, but into heaven itself, so that he might now appear in the presence of God. What? For us. For us. Are you grateful that God has appeared in heaven itself for you? For you. If we read this, if you've been here for any of the past few weeks or the couple months as we've been going through the book of Hebrews, this language might sound familiar to you. We could go back to Hebrews chapter 8, verses 1 and 2, where it says the main point of what we're saying is that we have this high priest, a minister of the sanctuary and the true tabernacle that was set up by the Lord and not man. And we can go just a few passages before where we're at tonight in Hebrews chapter 9, and it says, but Christ has appeared as a high priest of the good things that have come in the greater and more perfect tabernacle, not made with hands, that is, not of this creation. And I love what verse 12 says. He entered the most holy place once for all time, not by the blood of goats and calves, but by his own blood, having obtained eternal redemption. I know that's a lot right up front, but as we've come through Hebrews, especially recently, we've seen that Jesus is high priest of a superior sanctuary. He ministers in the way of a superior service, and it's by a superior sacrifice. He is now in the presence of God for us. He is there on our behalf. Therefore, one of the verses I always refer to, Hebrews 4:16, therefore, let us approach the throne of grace with boldness, that we may receive mercy and find grace to help us in time of need. This explanation has been one that's probably most emphasized throughout our series, and that is this, that we have access. That we have access. So as we continue to look at our text, we're going to have 4 observations, 4 takeaways from the text. And the first is this, talking about the perfect sacrifice of Christ. The first thing is the perfect sacrifice of Christ gives us entrance. The perfect sacrifice of Christ gives us entrance to the presence of God. Verse 25 and 26 of chapter 9 say, He did not do this to offer Himself many times, as the high priest enters the sanctuary yearly with the blood of another. Otherwise, He would have had to suffer many times since the foundation of the world. The repetition of sacrifices revealed the old covenant's ineffectiveness. That's something we have to understand. The repetition of those sacrifices revealed the ineffectiveness of the sacrifices. The high priest would enter the sanctuary year after year. Go there with me in your mind, visually. Try to imagine what's going on. The high priest would enter the sanctuary every year on the Day of Atonement. He would go through the same process as the previous years, knowing that, should he live until the next year, he would have to do it all over again. So Christ did not do this to offer Himself many times. He didn't do this. He did not enter heaven itself to offer Himself over and over again. His sacrifice was not one to be repeated. Why? Because it's superior. Because it's greater. Because it's sufficient. Because it's perfect. Because it's enough. It's enough. As I was studying for the message tonight, I'm reading through the text and looking at some other material, and one song came into mind, and we're going to reference it a couple times in the message. And it's not a super old song. It's called Christ is Enough. I don't know if you've ever heard of it. And the chorus simply says, Christ is enough for me. Christ is enough for me. Like, it's pretty repetitive. Everything I need is in you. Everything I need. And I began to just kind of start to sing that because I'm terrible with lyrics. So usually all I know of a chorus, if I ever get it stuck in my head, or all I know of a song, if I get it stuck in my head, is like the chorus or something. So I just start singing the song, and then as I'm like continually studying or whatever, then I'm like, oh yeah, I remember there's that part and there's that part. And so eventually I remembered the whole song and sang it, and we'll get to another part of the song here in a moment. But as I was thinking of this, Christ is enough. Christ is enough for me. It begged me to ask, Christ is enough for me. Is He enough to me? I know he's absolutely enough, but do I consider him to be the perfect sacrifice? Do I consider him at times, circumstances come, difficulties, whatever, do I consider him to be enough? Hebrews 7:27 says, he doesn't need to offer sacrifices every day as high priests do, first for their own sins, then for those of the people. He did this once for all time when he offered himself. Second thing is this: the perfect sacrifice of Christ is enough. It's enough because it was once for all. It was once for all. Second half of verse 26 says this: but now he has appeared one time at the end of the ages for the removal of sin by the sacrifice of himself. His sacrifice, the perfect sacrifice of Christ, marked the end of the ages, the consummation of the ages, some translations say, or the climax of the ages. And what followed this end was a new age, was the new covenant. And we've been kind of comparing and contrasting the old covenant and the new covenant in chapter 9 over the past few weeks. And one writer said that it's not that Christ happened to come at the time of fulfillment, but that his coming made that time the time of fulfillment. I hope that makes sense. As we continue reading this verse, we could pass it really quickly, but the end says, now he has appeared one time at the end of the ages for what? For the removal of sin by the sacrifice of himself. So not only is Christ's perfect sacrifice enough because it's once for all, but it provides the removal of sin. How perfect, how effective, and how much greater is such a sacrifice? No other sacrifice offered over and over and over could take away sin, could remove sin. However perfectly the sacrifice of the Mosaic Law met the standards of the Old Covenant, however perfectly it met the covenant, it could not remove sin. It still couldn't remove sin. And no other blood could clear the conscience of the worshiper. And we remember just a couple weeks ago in Hebrews chapter 9, we talked about this, the conscience. For if the blood of goats and bulls and the sacrifices, if they purify those who are defiled, if they sanctify for the purification of the flesh, how much more, the writer says, will the blood of Christ, who through the eternal Spirit offered himself without blemish to God, cleanse our consciences from dead works so that we can serve the living God. The author is saying right now, he's saying this is it. This is the end of the age of the over and over. This is the end of the age of the ineffective. Thirdly, Christ's perfect sacrifice gives us entrance, it's enough, and it marks the end. It marks the end. So now, what we look forward to is what the writer says, not the repetition of Christ's sacrifice, but what we look forward to now is the return of Christ because his sacrifice was perfect. It was enough. It was once for all. The final two verses, 27 and 28, say this: and just as it is appointed for people to die once, and after this judgment, so also Christ, having been offered once to bear the sins of many, will appear a second time, not to bear sin, but to bring salvation to those who are waiting for him. It's appointed for people to die once. How many of you are excited about that? Thanks, Nick. Glad I came tonight. Y'all gonna die. What? We understand this. We know this, that our life will come to an end. It's appointed for us to die at some point in time. In these verses, though, one of the main focuses is the writers focusing on the, kind of making this word up here, the onceness. The onceness of the appointed death of people and the offered death of Christ. Contrast is then made in that what follows the death of people is judgment. And what followed the death of Christ, because he bore the sins of many, is salvation to those who are what? Waiting for him. Some translations say he'll appear a second time to bring salvation to those who are eagerly waiting for him, or to those who are looking for him. So fourthly, the perfect sacrifice of Christ leads us to eagerly wait. The author's mention of Christ appearing and those waiting in these verses is a reference to the Day of Atonement, and I'll explain here. On this specific day, the high priest would enter with the blood of the designated sacrifice into the most holy place, into the Holy of Holies, on behalf of the people. Okay, we're probably familiar with that if we've been here for the past couple weeks or a couple weeks at all. At this time, when the priest enters in, the people would watch and wait. They would watch and wait as the priest entered on their behalf. And you better believe that they eagerly waited on the appearance of the high priest. Because when the high priest appeared, it meant God's acceptance of him and the sacrifice. So can you imagine the tension here? I don't know if you guys, forgive me for comparing this to like a suspenseful movie, but I don't know in that moment if there were those that, kind of closed their eyes, until they heard maybe the sighs of relief or, a positive sound, and they would open and they would see the high priest, or maybe there were those that were looking and holding on intently. Can you imagine the tension? Some writings said that they would worship in silence as they waited. I don't know about you, but I'm not good at waiting for anything. I'm not even good at waiting for anything good. And for me, we were talking at this table earlier about food. Food is a really, really good thing. But when I'm hangry, I have a hard time waiting. Now, in comparison to what we're talking about, that example is meaningless and terrible. But in the Old Covenant, imagine waiting without a clear conscience. Imagine the high priest enters in on your behalf, and you stand there worshiping in silence. Maybe amongst a crowd. Maybe it's so quiet you could hear a pin drop, or maybe there's noise from people moving around. I don't know. But the reality of not having a clear conscience in that moment, could you imagine the weight? Yet we lose sight of the perfect sacrifice of Jesus, and we have a hard time with a different weight. Waiting on him. The perfect sacrifice of Christ gives us entrance. It is enough. It marks the end so that we can wait well. And we can wait well because waiting isn't the end. Going back to the song I mentioned earlier, Christ is enough. You should look it up, listen to it sometime this week. It's a great song that would encourage you. The chorus, Christ is enough for me. Everything I need is in you. And when I began to remember the whole song, I remembered the last part that's kind of this anthem, kind of ripped off from another old worship song. It says, I have decided to follow Jesus, no turning back, no turning back. And so I'm singing this chorus, and I'm singing this anthem, and I'm thinking about what's being said, and I'm thinking about the audience, and knowing what the audience of Hebrews was going through, that the writer was trying to bring them to see that Christ is enough, to the point that they would declare with their lives, I've decided to follow Jesus, no turning back. The point being no turning back. And so I would go a step further in the fourth point in saying that the perfect sacrifice of Christ not only leads and enables us to eagerly wait, but to eagerly endure. To eagerly endure the circumstances that we face, the things that come up in life. How am I going to face what's in front of me? How am I going to consider it pure joy when I face trials? Well, the perfect sacrifice of Christ gives us entrance. He's enough, marks the end, and He leads us to eagerly wait. At the beginning, I talked about how I would imagine what it would be like to receive the perfect gift. Should I know, though, what that gift was, that gift was available, even greater that gift was coming, would I not freak out? Wouldn't I anticipate the fulfillment with excitement? If I knew it could do this, would I not prepare for that? If I knew it needed this much space in my room or my life, or it required this, would I not give it that? Would I not make that room? How much greater is the gift of salvation? How perfect the sacrifice of Christ. I finish by reading the end of verse 28. Christ, having been offered once to bear the sins of many, will appear a second time, not to bear sin, but to bring salvation to those who are waiting for Him. Are you waiting for Him? Are you expecting Him? Are you looking forward to Him? Are you eagerly waiting for Him? Please continue to have conversations and chat. Just want to pray a prayer of blessing over you guys for the week. Thanks again so much for being here and just joining the community tonight. Also, we're going to be, again, reminder, apartment C1 across the way. Hope to see you there and hang out and have a good time. Hope you're encouraged. Let me pray for you, and then please continue having your conversations. Lord, we love you so much. And God, we thank you Lord, for the sacrifice of your Son. God, we thank you for all that you have done for us. God, thank you that you are good and you are faithful. God, I pray that if there's anybody here tonight that needs a special touch from you, God, that you would make yourself clearly known to them this week as they go about their jobs and their workplaces or schooling throughout the summer, whatever it is, Father. Would you just touch them? Bless each and every person tonight. Keep them safe as they're traveling over the long weekend. We love you, Lord. It's in your name we pray. Amen. Love you guys so much. Look forward to seeing you later.